So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our next workshop in our Say Yes to Autism Acceptance campaign for World Autism Month in April, which is on self-advocacy. My name is Adrian Carroll. I am the Training and Accessibility Officer for AsIAm, as well as an autistic self-advocate, and I will be the host of this afternoon's workshop. Before I start, I would like to thank SuperValue for kindly sponsoring both this workshop and our Say Yes to Autism Acceptance appeal for the month of April. This is part of our series of workshops and webinars that AsIAm are running over the month of April for our Say Yes to Autism Acceptance campaign. You can sign up to the events that we're running over the rest of April over on our website asiam.ie by going to our events tab. If you enjoyed today's event, we would particularly appreciate any support that you can give to us to continue to provide these workshops and webinars and to support the autism community. You can head over to asiam.ie/donate. Our hashtag for this appeal is Autism Month Say Yes. So self-advocacy is a really important part within the autism community as a way for standing up for your rights, and it can take lots of different forms. So it can mean advocating for yourself to get the services and supports you want, or it can mean advocating on behalf of the wider autism or disability community to push for social change. It can also mean seeking reasonable accommodations at work or at school, or it can also mean disclosing that you're autistic to friends or family. So there is no right or wrong way to be a self-advocate, and anybody can be a self-advocate. So at the heart is about accepting who you are, knowing what you need to live the life that you want to live, and claiming your space within society. So there is a great tradition of self-advocacy within the disability community, particularly around people who are autistic and for people who have intellectual and neurodevelopmental disabilities. And the self-advocacy movement plays a key role within the wider disability movement. And this is reflected in the mantra, nothing about us without us. So without further ado, I'm delighted to be joined by Tara Killen, who will be facilitating today's workshop and exploring self-advocacy in more detail. So Tara is the founder and clinical director of Thriving Autistic, a nonprofit global team of autistic psychologists, coaches, occupational therapists, and counselors who work together to support the mental well-being of autistic adults. Tara holds a Master of Science degree in coaching psychology and positive psychology and has over 2 decades experience in working with diverse groups of adults from around the world. Alongside her work in Thriving Autistic, Tara is also the support lead at the Adult Autism Practice. She and her team provide post-diagnostic support for all adults who have been diagnosed through the practice. So Tara's expertise is grounded in both professional and lived experience, as well as being the mother of 3 fantastic autistic children. She is also an autistic woman. So the format of today's session is that Tara is going to deliver her presentation on self-advocacy, which will last about 45 minutes. And we will be taking questions at the end of Tara's presentation. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A box. So the session will conclude at 2 p.m. And I just want to say the floor is yours, Tara.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen here. Thank you everybody for joining today. Thank you SuperValue for providing the opportunity, and thanks so much to AsIAm for this platform. I'm really just so grateful to get to connect directly with people in the community in this way. Adrian, I loved what you said there. Thank you so much for that. So to move on, because we have lots to get through and we don't have a huge amount of time, I just want to introduce you briefly to some of my team. We have more team members who don't have bio photos up yet, but we're all autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. We have some ADHD members too. And we work to support autistic adults and neurodivergent adults, but mostly autistic adults, in both workplace and educational settings, home life, parenting, family relationships, applying for disability benefits, helping people figure out how to advocate for themselves and how to really, I suppose, live a thriving life. So what is self-advocacy? And Adrian has just explained it perfectly there, so I'm not going to spend much more time on it, but the basic concept, as Adrian said there, is speaking up for ourselves. The overview today is, I've kind of broken it into 3 parts, and then we'll have the Q&A at the end. We've loads to get through, so I'm going to try and be brief. And this webinar will be recorded as well, so you can look back on it, or you can contact me if there's anything that you wanted to ask about. But part 1 is about your right to thrive and why you deserve to advocate for yourself. Then we'll have a quick little break, maybe a minute or so, just to move around. Part 2 is figuring out what your needs actually are. And so some of our needs will be really obvious to us, and others may not be so obvious, and we might need to systematically figure out in different contexts what they are. Then again, another quick little break, and then we're going to move into self-advocacy in action. And that will be talking through and explaining different areas of your life that you can advocate for yourself in. Again, we'll have hopefully a really quick little break and a question and answer session. So part 1, and this is all about your right to thrive. And what I find in my practice, and also what I find with my colleagues and my friends and in the wider disability community, is that until we're really grounded in our understanding of why we have a right to thrive in this world, why we have a right to exist, and to be here and to work to our best, or to exist and love our lives as much as possible, until we really get grounded in that, it's more difficult to speak up for ourselves. So I'm going to talk here about self-acceptance, about ableism. Some of these words you might be really familiar with, and others may be new to you. About the social model of disability, minority stress, and intersectionality. So starting off with here, this gorgeous image from Erin Human. Diversity is beautiful. And if you look at diversity in the animal world, there's millions of different kinds of animals. In diversity of people, there's so many different types of people. We come in all sorts, shapes, sizes, genders, abilities, colors. We're all unique, as Erin says. But more recently, we figured out that actually there's a diversity of human brains as well. And, really, I suppose, of course there is. How did we not understand this before? But this webinar and really the neurodiversity approach and the whole understanding as we have evolved as a people is that there is diversity of human brains. That it's not just that there's one perfect type of brain and every other type of brain is like a deficient in comparison to it. No, that's just not the way, that's not reality. Reality is that there's many different neurotypes. People often think that the autism spectrum looks like that picture on the left, where it's a line showing, on one side a person's less autistic and the other end of it a person is more autistic. And this is a fantastic cartoon, actually, and you can find it on the internet there by Rebecca Burgess, and I have the link there to her cartoon. It explains this in much more detail. But what the spectrum actually looks like and what autism looks like, it comes out differently in each person. So each autistic person will have strengths and challenges in different areas. Here in this image, we have language, motor skills, sensory, perception, and executive functioning. And some people prefer to call that planning. So where we can have either real strengths in areas of planning or real difficulties in areas of planning. So no two autistic people are the same. And even within one autistic person, their profile, say, on this spectrum will look different at different times of the day, at different times of their life, whether they're under extreme amounts of stress or not, or they're being very relaxed. So it's very, very difficult. And actually it's impossible to pin down and say, well, people, the autism spectrum looks like this and autistic people are like this, because everyone is different. I'm going to show you a little video, and I'm going to give you a tiny content warning. It's a brilliant video. And it explains about ableism, but there is, parts of it, parts of the history of what has happened to different people who are different to the majority has not been pretty. But this will give you a really good understanding about what is ableism. And hopefully, if the tech gods are with us, it'll play.
What is ableism? It's a form of discrimination based on a value system that considers certain body and mind characteristics essential to living a fulfilling life and assumes that the quality of life of people with disabilities must be very low. In ableism, like in racism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression, dominant social groups project their own image as the model for how humanity should be, rejecting or ignoring others as inferior, normal, or unfit. This bias is used to justify their exclusion, sometimes even their extermination. One example is the eugenics movement, which emerged in the early 20th century and resulted in the forced sterilization of more than 60,000 women, men, and children with disabilities under the pretext of improving humanity's needs. In Nazi Germany, more than 300,000 persons with disabilities were exterminated because their lives were considered unworthy. But despite the scale of these atrocities, ableism continues to spread, and its significance remains little understood. Ableist social views still shape our understanding of what it means to live with disabilities and how the lives of people with disabilities are valued. Thousands of women and girls continue to be sterilized against their will, and many more persons with disabilities spend their lives confined in institutions, prisons, or at home, and deemed to be incapable of living in the community. Ableism underpins the way our societies are organized. Basic daily activities, such as going to school or work, taking public transport, doing groceries, or practicing a hobby are made difficult, if not impossible, for persons with disabilities and end up excluded and isolated. Human rights challenge ableism and other forms of oppression and fight for a world where diversity is valued and embraced. Humanity is always changing. People everywhere use their minds and bodies in different ways. And those differences are what makes us stronger. Human diversity is all around us. We are all part of it. Let's embrace it.
So that's a really powerful piece. And if you want to watch it again, this webinar will be up online in the next day or so. Or you can view that directly on the UN Vimeo website. But looking here with intersectionality, I mean, people who are members of the traveling community, Black people, people who are members of the LGBTQIA community, along with lots of other disadvantaged groups, they all experience layers of disadvantage and layers of prejudice in society. So when we're talking about ableism and when we're talking about the difficulties that autistic people that we experience, it's also important to recognize that we may be members of other minority communities too. And so we have more than just one type of prejudice to deal with. That can cause what's known in technical terms, I suppose, in academia as minority stress. And it comprises of these different areas that are here on this slide, experiences that we have of discrimination and prejudice, expectations that we might have that we're going to be rejected, having to make decisions about disclosure of who we really are or concealing, internalized stigma or negative views of our own identity is such a really core difficulty of minority stress, because that affects our ability to self-advocate. Because if we're feeling bad about our own identity, then, and we've spent a lifetime trying to fit in with everybody else and not accepting our own needs or speaking out for them, then it's even more difficult to speak out and to want and expect equality or equity. And coping with all of these different experiences as a person who's experiencing minority stress has a huge impact on our mental health and our general well-being. So previously, and it's hopefully in 10 years, this will be completely outdated. It's on the way out. But before, we were only viewed within the medical model of disability. And the medical model is this idea where the problem is inside the person. So that there's this norm of like a normal person in society. And anybody who isn't that is the problem. And we have to fix the problem. We have to fix them. So clearly that medical model of disability has just been written from the point of view of one particular type of human. Coming out of the disability rights movement has been this idea of a disabling world. And that is under the umbrella of the social model of disability. And with the social model of disability, we recognize that there are many different types of people, yet the whole world has been set up just to fit and suit one type of person. So then we look at, okay, the problem is not inside the person, the problem is actually inside the way society has been set up. And then how do we figure out what those barriers are for equal access and for everybody to get the same opportunities, depending on what their needs are. And that's where we started then to change, to figure out what the barriers are and change those barriers. This is another little video, and it is about the social model of disability. It's very tongue-in-cheek, and it's done quite a long time ago. So some of the language probably wouldn't be my favorites, but I think that you might enjoy it, and it might be something you could use to get the point across if you wanted to show it to somebody else. Again, if it works.
Sam has got a new dog today. He sets off with plenty of time to catch the bus. Getting on the bus is difficult for Sam, and he has to bend down awkwardly to get to the door. There are no seats. He asked a disgruntled wheelchair user to move from the priority standing area. This has been specially adjusted for non-wheelchair users. He arrives at the office and meets his new manager. He waits patiently as they find the only chair in the building. He carries his chair to his new desk, hitting his head on the low ceiling as he goes. He finds his induction pack on his desk, but he realizes that it's all written in Braille. He's confused and turns to his colleagues for help. They tell him they'll be happy to get it translated, but this will take at least a week. Sam carries his chair to the canteen and joins his colleagues for lunch. It asks him lots of questions about what it's like to be too tall and if he's considered seeing a doctor to fix it. After lunch, they decide to plan a Save Sam's Knee fundraiser to raise money for a hardened helmet and lower leg guards so he can walk on his knees more easily. They all gather to tell Sam.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. Right here.
And joins his colleagues for lunch. It asked him lots of questions about what it's like to be too tall and if he's considered seeing a doctor to fix it. After lunch, they decided to plan a Save Sam's Knees fundraiser to raise money for a hardened helmet and lower leg guards so he can walk on his knees more easily. They all gathered to tell Sam what they had planned. Sam asks, "Couldn't you just have raised the roof?" I've just spent a day in a disabling world where everything is a battle. Disabled people are disabled by barriers at work and in day-to-day life, not by their impairments or difference. Removing barriers is the only way to achieve equality for disabled people. That is what the social model of disability is all about.
So apologies, the captions weren't coming up for me there. Hopefully you've been able to access them through the Zoom, through Zoom there yourselves, but that's what made that little glitch. I was trying to fix the captions. So that video gives us an idea about, where the social model of disability is, that we just need to change. So much of what disables us is the way society has been built. And that is not to say that there are some things that we still would need assistance with and we still would need help with. That's not to say that that's a separate piece. But overall, this idea of neurodiversity is that it may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. And as Harvey Bloom says, who can say what form of wiring will be best at any given moment? Particularly with autism and different neurotypes, we can see, that there are so many strengths and there are challenges as well, but there are so many strengths that are really bring value into life. We need all types of people. We need generalists as well as specialists. And yes, we accept completely there are challenges and we have challenges, but there are also strengths and we also have strengths and we do have a right to get to use those strengths, to get those challenges accommodated for and get to bring our full selves into society, into the world, into living the lives that we want to live. And then if we can live in a world of equal access, we're free to use our strengths to the benefit of all. So just take a quick little comfort break moment here. And Adrian, if there's anything that you'd like to jump in and add at any point, please do, because this is your real area of expertise, I know as well. Okay. So we're going to move on now to part 2. And part 2 is about figuring out what your needs actually are. I want to start about talking about accommodating others versus accommodating yourself. And a lot of the time there are what I call competing needs. For example, in my family, there's 5 of us and we're all neurodivergent in some way. And we, a lot of the time, will have competing needs. That may be that one of us has a need for a lot of quiet and a lot of physical space. And then others may need a lot of noise and a lot of proximity and a lot of closeness. So there were examples where you have competing needs. And so a lot of, even though why this part is about figuring out what your needs are, they're going to be very unique to you. And particularly in the case of when you have competing needs in a family, for instance, a lot of it can be very fluid, and it can be really helpful to work through with somebody, a trusted friend or a coach or somebody, to figure out how to manage those fluid situations within the home, for instance, where, you know, if you're trying to, say, cook the dinner, you're one of the parents cooking the dinner and you need silence to do that, yet the kids are there and there's lots of screaming and they have a need to make lots of noise. How do you manage that? So there's different solutions that will, and that's a real common one that we get people come to us with, and it's one that I had personally as well. One of the competing needs I had at the start of my journey, into figuring out how to accommodate all of us. So at times you'll do, in those situations, at times you'll need like headphones. One person wears headphones, or the other people try and keep a little bit quieter or go into a different room to make noise, or if the person who needs the quiet can leave. So you taking turns. It's about being flexible there and about figuring out what works for everybody. So it's not that one person is always accommodating others. Now, if you have spent your life trying to fit in with everyone else, and you have spent many years either knowing you're autistic and trying to still fit and push through and mask, or camouflage, either as it's known, or if you're a late diagnosed adult and you always felt out of sync with everyone else and you were always trying to fit in, and doing what other people wanted rather than what you wanted or needed, you may not be very clear on what your needs actually are. So you might find that some of your needs are pretty obvious, but others you're not realizing really the level to what you're putting up with on a daily basis. And what can happen there is that over time you end up burning out. This is a great little diagram about symptoms of autistic burnout. And, you know, I know, as was said about me in the introduction, I have a master's of science in coaching psychology. And, you know, I started to train as a counselor 20 years ago, and then I went into psychotherapy and then into psychology. And so I have all that training, but in between I've had lots of burnout, and even in the middle at some points where I've had to take breaks and come back because of trying to push through and fit in. Um, so some of the symptoms are having intense meltdowns or shutdowns. Meltdowns are where the are more generally more explosive, where the emotions, where everything is coming out of you, whereas shutdowns would be more where everything is closing down and shutting down, and you can't speak and you may need to sleep and just struggle to do anything. Struggles with self-care, loss of planning or executive functioning abilities, unable to maintain those masks in social situations, reduced memory capacity or feeling under a lot of brain fog a lot of the time, or being unable to speak or form words and sentences. I find even for myself, after a long day in work, I can't speak anymore. Um, so, you know, lots, and depending on what levels of stress I'm under, I have variable speech. So it comes and goes. So we all have, you will have your own, I suppose, profile of what this looks like with you. And again, this is where it's really worthwhile if I see it as I suppose the shallow end of the pool. So rather than diving into the deep end, if you can get into the shallow end of the pool and practice these things in the shallow end, they're more useful to you than when you're swimming in the deep. So for instance, it would be really useful if you're feeling in a pretty good place right now and you've come to look at this webinar and learn a little bit about this, to spend some time figuring out what your profile is. What are your symptoms of starting to head into burnout? And if you can do it on your own, that's fantastic, or get somebody to help you, somebody who's really supportive, because part of self-advocacy is also realizing when we need to speak up and look for support. This is just a whoa picture to me, visual clutter, but it gives us an example here of sensory overload. And in shopping, you know, the different types of sensory overload we can experience, why it might cause sensory overload in us. And some of the things here are noisy trolleys, carts, shelves with lots of colorful products, checkouts, bleeping, fast moving escalators, all the different smells, the background music, the bright strip lights, the temperature changes. I know some of the supermarkets have brought in, and I know SuperValue was like one of the leaders in this field of bringing in quieter times for autistic people. And that's definitely progress. And then I know lots of us are starting to use more and more using online shopping as well, which avoids all of this. But if you know that this is going to stress you out and exhaust you, then you could decide, okay, I'm only doing this once every whatever amount of days or weeks you're going to do it. And I'm going to schedule the rest of the day to just do things that give me energy, that calm me, regulate me. And learning how to regulate yourself and understanding all of that is really, really useful skill. Um, Another brilliant one, empathy on the spectrum. This image is like what society thinks I can feel, nothing, and what I actually feel, all the feelings. And we're not, again, from that image earlier, we're not all the same. Some of us experience this, so that if we're around people and we can feel their different energies and we soak them up like a sponge, and it has a real impact on our energy, on our energy levels, and that can contribute to burnout. Interoception is a sense. So the main senses. It's our sense of sight, our sense of sound, our sense of taste, smell, touch. But interoception is the sense of knowing what's going on inside your body, and lots of us have difficulty with interoception. So that might look like you're never aware that you're hungry until suddenly you're really angry or irritable or starving, really need to eat fast, or maybe not noticing signals that you need to use the bathroom until you're really bursting to go. Um, so, not noticing, or you might overeat, or the same with thirst, the same with pain. You may either be extremely sensitive to pain and feel it to a really exceptional degree compared to the average person, or you may not notice pain. You may be, your body may be experiencing pain, but you're not aware of that. So interoception can really be massively important. And lots of autistic adults, lots of us don't have poor interoception awareness. It can be supported to get better. We can train ourselves to get better at our awareness of what's going on inside our bodies. And so it's relevant to self-advocacy because if we're not aware of what's going on inside our bodies and we're putting ourselves in really uncomfortable situations that we're not aware of or uncomfortable for us, we'll go straight from that into burnout or meltdown or shutdown. So being aware of that, learning how to be aware of that is just such a hugely useful thing to do. And here's more about interoception, but I'm going to move on. This is about planning, and this is just, I suppose, to talk about how, again, that spectrum picture from earlier, this person here, they're an autistic adult, they can't read a traditional clock, an analog clock. They don't know multiplication and they have trouble tying up their shoes. But they're also a law school graduate and they hold a corporate job. And the person saying the ability to tie your shoes doesn't determine your success. And so that's where, with planning, from the outside, somebody could say, oh, well, that person's in law school and they hold a corporate job. But that's not telling the whole picture. We also don't know whether this person has difficulty feeding themselves and, cooking for themselves and keeping their house clean and self-care and all of those kind of skills. And we're at the end of part 2, so let's just take a moment. Adrian, again, if you want to jump in, do. Otherwise, I'll just give us 30 seconds stretch break. I know if people are putting in questions, because I'm screen sharing, I can't see them, but we'll do them at the end. Okay, and now we're going to move on to part 3. And part 3 is self-advocacy in action in different contexts. So I already spoke earlier about family relationships and competing needs, but asking for what you need is just so vitally important, and figuring out in different contexts what you need. If you look at like friendships or social interactions, I know that we're not, in Ireland, we're still pretty much in lockdown. Nobody's going anywhere. I know the last few days we're allowed walk a little bit more and drive a little bit further, but nobody's going into any busy places. But if you were, so outside of COVID times, going to meet friends, for example, going to meet friends and they're suggesting that you meet in some busy coffee shop. Self-advocacy in action there is saying, do you know what? I don't want to meet there. I'd love to meet you, but that's not going to work for me because I won't be able to hear you. I'm going to be distracted and it'll be too overwhelming, all the busyness, all the noise. If auditory processing is a difficulty for you, and if being in a busy environment is a difficulty for you. Some people love busy environments. So it really depends on your own individual profile. But again, in those kind of social interactions, in friendships, learning how to advocate for yourself can be a massive step. There's so many adults that I work with that we find it difficult to speak up for ourselves and to just ask those simple things. And the thing is that we often can think, oh, well, I can cope with it, I can do it, so I do it. But then we, down the line in a few hours or the next day, it's just added to the strain on our whole nervous system and our regulation. And it's reduced the ability that we have to really, I suppose, get out there and do what we want to do. So it impacts on our energy, it impacts on our energy levels, and learning how to ask for what we need in those simple little interactions, from the simple interactions to the huge things like healthcare. Healthcare is massive. It can be a massive difficulty for us going into, and lots of us have many different, I think it's called co-occurring conditions. Yes. So lots of us have many different co-occurring conditions where we might need medical health care. So we might need to be frequently going to the doctor or going into hospital, going to A&E. And though each of those visits can be fraught with anxiety, a lot of the anxiety can be to do with the fact that the environment is so unsuitable for us. So figuring out what our healthcare needs and asking for them can be a really useful skill. I'm going to move on because I actually have, our team has, put together this healthcare passport for autistic adults, and it's just up on our website from today, thrivingautistic.org, and resources. And now this is just something that we've put together to help you, support you and us as well. If we're going to hospital, if we're going anywhere, to maybe, not have to advocate for ourselves using our mouth, but having it written out beforehand might make it much easier to just hand this. So you can download it and fill it out and print it. And we're asking at the front for staff to please consult the passport and make reasonable adjustments before undertaking any assessment, examination, treatment, or care, basically before interacting with us. So we pulled this document together and we based it on the best practice guidelines. The HSE have actually issued a fantastic health passport for people with intellectual difficulties in 2019, but they don't have one for autistic adults. So autistic adults with intellectual difficulties may like to use the HSE one, but as far as we can find, we couldn't find anything else out there, so we created our own. We based it on that and the UK National Autistic Society's health passport. But we put in here, like, you can just put in your personal details, vital things to know about you, your emergency contact people, and your pronouns, because it's so important. We want to be referred to by our correct pronouns. And my current medical, sorry, I can't see because I can't see the whole screen because of my cameras in the way, but my current medical situation, whatever medicines I'm on, and please don't make any changes without first consulting. So just giving information about your medical history. If you have it written down, then you may not have to explain it all over again. How you communicate. For example, some of us communicate in writing, using communication aids, or using our mouths, and how people can communicate with us. So, for example, lots of us find open questions really difficult and we struggle with that. So an open question, for example, is how was your day? And there's so many variables that we'd have to consider to answer that question. But a closed question would be something very specific, like, now I'm not going to be able to remember one, but something very specific would be like, do you remember what you had for lunch today, for example? What was that? What did you eat for lunch today? Okay, so really specific. So you can ask people to give you that clear, specific language. And in Thriving Autistic, we do that when we work with anybody. The first thing we ask is, do you prefer open or closed questions? How do you like to communicate? Do you want to communicate over Zoom? Do you want to communicate via text? How do you want to do that? How to help if I'm having difficulty communicating? For example, then people could reduce extra noise, give us more physical space, give us a quiet area. And then a vital thing to know, just to highlight if there's any of those parts that are really vital you want them to know about. How we experience pain, it's different for, autistics across the board. We have different ways of experiencing pain, and this is an opportunity to put out information so you're not misunderstood, because we know that autistics are misunderstood a lot of the time when we don't necessarily have the behavioral responses. It doesn't necessarily look in our face how people would expect us to look in terms of their pain, or how we might hold ourselves. So this gives us a chance to write out what it is that is specific to us. Then our sensory needs, so again, like if we go into hospital, our family, we wear our sunglasses and headphones, and think, passions, my passions, what I like talking about. So if people want to connect with us. And with this, you could print it out and use what works for you and just throw out what doesn't. You don't have to use it all. I'm just going back here. Sorry if I'm disorientating you. Coming up towards the end, but with workplace and college, now this is a huge, huge area, and you are entitled to get reasonable accommodations in workplace and college, and that's enshrined in the EU law. So reasonable accommodations, and in fact, Adrian, I'm sure we'll talk about this after. He's the expert in the law of this, but the reasonable accommodations that would help us to basically work to our strengths. So accommodate us to just get to be there on an equitable footing with everybody else, and then work to our strengths. What might they be? For so many adults that are coming to us at Thriving Autistic, they don't know what accommodations they need. So it's a really good thing to figure, sit down and try and figure out, okay, what are the accommodations that people generally ask for, and how could any of those work for me? We've created, one of our brilliant team members has created this for us, a workplace accommodation self-reflection exercise, and it's on the website. You can download it, and it's about identifying, figuring out in your your day-to-day life what bothers you, brainstorms, have a look at your sensory, your routine, your social. So there's a whole lovely little workbook here that you can download, and you can work out yourself, and then that'll help you figure out what accommodations you need. You can also look at, for example, the AsIAm website. Have a brilliant piece all about accommodations in workplace, and so you can look at those and give you some examples. We have some too on our website, and I'm going to fast forward here through because you've talked about this. Yeah, these are some more resources that you'll find. So, yeah, Thriving Autistic, AsIAm.ie both have great ideas about accommodations in the workplace or college. And then ahead.ie, advocacy.ie is fantastic for if you're looking for an advocate to come and help you and work through with you, what it is that you need help, support in advocating about. And also autisticadvocacy.org is another great one to figure out a lot about how to self-advocate. Speciallistern.ie, they ended up there twice somehow, but they will help with people who know what kind of area if you know what area you want to work in, and you see they do job adverts all the time. They'll help support you, to coach you to get a job, and help support you when you're in the job. InclusionIreland.ie also offer advocacy services, and they have so much support, a whole self-advocacy toolkit that you can download. And NotSoDifferent.ie is one that I've only recently discovered. It looks really interesting too. They do all sorts of free job coaching. And I think I am, yes, just at the end. So thank you so much for your time. If there's anything that you wanted to go into more detail or ask me about, please go ahead and email me there. And I will stop the share if I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara, for your amazing presentation. So we're going to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes for our webinar and fielding questions from the audience. So basically, I'll start here. So we have a question from an attendee who has been looking to see if there's any way that they can address being mistreated, being treated by healthcare professionals. They have been feeling that they've been feeling mistreated by healthcare professionals during their experience over the last couple of weeks, and they've been and it's just been kind of around the idea of the passport. So what they were wondering is that if there was any way that they can able to address this and to advocate in the absence of having an advocate or supporter.
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I'm so sorry that that's been your experience. It's really awful, and you don't deserve that. There's absolutely nobody has any right to treat you like that. It's just awful. And particularly at this time when we're not able to have supporters with us, it's absolutely just despicable. But how to address the infantilization and the disrespect? Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. You love the idea of that passport. I think that could be a really good one to have and hand it to them. Perhaps escalate that to a manager, to speak to somebody, to see internally, if you're not able to bring someone in from outside, is there an advocate within the hospital? If you speak to managers. Adrian, do you have any more ideas on that? Because that would be probably more, I'd say you do.
I think also for something like that, Tara, what might be helpful would be to get in touch with somebody like the National Advocacy Service, like you mentioned earlier. I think that they could give a lot of practical ideas, and they can give a lot of advice as to how you can approach these situations as well. And I suppose also as well that there's lots of really good handbooks around the issue of self-advocacy from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network in America. Yeah. They do a great deal of work on that. And I guess that kind of goes, I suppose for something like that in terms of the healthcare, again, Tara's piece as Tara as passport for the for healthcare, and the Adapt toolkit would be really good ones in terms of kind of expressing your needs, needs in a healthcare setting with that.
Okay.
But I think from something like that, I think it's always kind of good to have. I think from apart from that, I think the main piece I would say as well would be to kind of know what you want to say. I guess, and in terms of kind of the absence of that as well, another thing that you could always kind of go to if you have a specific complaint about having your rights violated would be to go to somebody like the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission as well. And they would also have a Know Your Rights helpline as well if you go to irec.ie. So if you have any kind of particular issue that you feel that your rights have been violated, then you can always kind of go to them, and they can explain what the law is in a certain situation, and they can give you also some advice about what you want to do, if there's anything that you want to do that could help resolve the issues that you're having.
And Adrian, you know, the way AsIAm do fantastic work with universities. Do you guys do training with hospitals as well, or is there any pathway for hospitals to start becoming more autism friendly?
I think that we're doing kind of a number of things in that area. So the first thing that we've done as sort of an initial piece is that we did a piece with Tala University Hospital in terms of autism awareness training. So that was kind of the first thing, kind of like tipping our toe out. We've also done pieces with the with CUH, which is Cork University Hospital, in terms of training and accreditation. We're hoping to do more on that area over the coming months ahead. So again, it's just kind of watching this space, but we identified that it's definitely something that we're hoping to do a lot more in terms of helping the autistic, supporting the autistic community when accessing healthcare settings, but also kind of looking at shifting and sort of moving the dial in terms of wide attitudes among the radical community to autism and to autistic people as well. So we're hoping to have to move on those pieces over the coming months.
That's brilliant. That's really great. Yeah. I wonder as well, like I personally found before asking for people's full names if they're being disrespectful or horrible to me, you know, asking, saying like, can I have your full name, please? I'm not feeling I like this conversation, you know, and they may be the only words I could use in the time, but having, you know, asking for that can make people kind of think twice sometimes, that you're not just going to accept the treatment. In the hospital situation, that is, if somebody's being in our attendee's question there. And I wonder, would that be a useful thing to do a little card up that we could have that people could download, you know, just around respect for us. But that's fantastic that you guys are working with Cork University Hospital and a few hospitals.
I think just as a sort of another piece, as well. If there's any more questions, we'd like to hear them as well. I think just from another piece I kind of wanted to address in terms of workplace accommodations, there's a number of pieces of legislation, and we have a few pieces on our website that kind of addresses reasonable accommodations in the workplace. So that would kind of range from kind of like the supports you need to right up to the laws of policies that sort of govern that particular area. So it's so it kind of covers the Irish law in terms of that. So that's governed with the Employment Equality Act, and also with the with the EU directive with that as well. Just kind of in terms of sort of the accommodations that we want, I think that there's kind of a wide range of accommodations you can ask for. There's also kind of a good way, another thing that might be useful would be to kind of look at seeing if there's like you said, with the healthcare passport, we would also look at having a reasonable accommodation passport. Yes. And so that way it can kind of give a sense about what kind of accommodations you believe you might be reasonable to ask for. That's suited to the area, the area or the line of work that you're in, because I know it can be different for different people. For instance, if you're working at a hotel, or if you're working at a restaurant or a shop, those accommodations could look very different to, say, somebody who's sitting on a desk who's working in an office, for instance. But I think it's so I think it's a really good way of kind of exploring with that. But I think it's also a really good way of kind of opening up and sort of starting a conversation about what your support needs are in that particular area. Yeah. And also in terms of kind of letting colleagues and letting managers know that you have this, that it can be kind of a way of sort of soft disclosing your difference. You might not necessarily feel comfortable about that as well. So it really works and it really works a number of levels, I think.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Yeah, we're starting to work on that as well, on figuring out. So we've got the reflective exercise there to figure out what your needs actually are, but then also to a passport, you know, just that kind of an idea, an employer's guide to what we're looking for. And it's good for us to know as well that those reasonable accommodations, as you're saying, that they're in law, but So if the employer can give the accommodations, can the person still do the job? Because we have to be able to do the job. So that's been acquired. So if it's like in a busy coffee shop, say,
Yeah.
I mean, how can accommodations be given that are enough that can support us to still do that job? You know, it depends on the person's profile, doesn't it?
It does. No, it does. And I think also as well, it kind of depends on what kind of the environment they're in as well. For example, if you're sitting inside of like say a fast food restaurant, like say, or a busy coffee shop, there's going to be a lot of nights. There's going to be a lot of noise. It's going to be very intense sensory experience for most of us as well. But I think particularly if you might be kind of wondering if around what kind of supports you might need in that space as well. So it could kind of take so for example, it might be the range of like say having the option of having regular stim breaks, for instance, or it can take the form, or it can kind of take the form of kind of saying to your manager, look, I need to take 5, for instance, just to kind of space myself out a bit and kind of give yourself a bit of time and space to sort of take it in. I think there's lots of different ways you can organize it, and there's lots of ways where it's kind of more an adjustment as to how you plan to work, as opposed to necessarily having a cost or particular technology as well. So I think it's probably kind of something that it's something that's kind of worth exploring. So again, when it comes to things like that, when it kind of comes to sort of things like reasonable accommodations when you're in a working environment, like it's very much depends on what your particular needs are. And again, it's also kind of depends as well about what you think, what you think that might be that might be able to support you in that to support you to do that particular job at work. I think it's probably so I think it's so there's lots of little, so there's a wide range of supports you can get from that area, and it's not necessarily kind of it's not supposed to kind of it's not really a way that you're kind of saying to somebody that you're autistic, these are the supports you need. It's a two-way conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. Like 20 different autistic people, you know, in the one job will have 20 different needs. And yeah, and as you say, like there's lots of physical needs where, like, say, lighting and, you know, where our desk is positioned if you're at a desk worker and those kind of things. But as well, there's loads of planning and, you know, being interrupted can be a huge thing. So having uninterrupted space to focus on the task and, you know, getting emails, and you'll only check emails at, you know, certain times, and getting that agreed if that's acceptable in the context of your job. You know, then it can give you that space to get to hyper focus and do what you need to do, that detailed work, without continual interruption.
Yeah.
For instance, for lots of us, that can be really helpful.
And I think even if it's just kind of looking at even if it's just kind of like something as simple as like you're only as like being able to text your manager on like WhatsApp, or being able to work from home, let's say an extra number of days in addition to the ones that you're already prescribed, that those are all kind of accommodations that you can kind of negotiate with your employer. And it's just kind of building the skills and the supports to be able to do that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Adrian. That's fantastic.
So I was wondering, is there any other questions that are there any other questions before kind of before wrapping up? Are there any other questions from the audience that would like to that you'd like to see answered?
I think somebody was asking about that that slide about the different resources.
Yeah.
Did we get that up? Do you want me to put that up?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. But I can email this to anybody who wants it anyway. So if, you know, they can just email me at tara@thrivingautistic.org.
Yeah. I think yeah, so I think that's probably yes, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Tara, and thank you so much everybody for joining us. We can share the slides if that suits. But I think kind of other than that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining as well, for joining us for this, and for taking time out of your day to learn more about self-advocacy. If you have, again, just as a kind of a final point as well, you can, if you'd like to find out more about our work or to donate, you can come to our website at asiam.ie, and if you can also kind of check our website as well, you'll find out a calendar of all of our all of the remaining events that we're going to hold over the months of April and over the coming months ahead. So thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy your day.
Thank you.